Where is your focus? What are you concentrating on? Are you concentrating on God and His Word? Or are you concentrating on something else? Are you being swayed by the winds? Are you being tossed by the waves? Well, that's what we're going to talk about today. Our focus point. Where should our focus be as Christians? So we're going to go ahead and get started. And the first scripture, the first person I would like to talk about, of course, is Peter. We know Peter was the only disciple to walk on water. And he was able to do this because he had his attention and his mind focused on Jesus. Remember, they were out on the boat and suddenly they saw this man or this thing walking towards them. And Peter says, Lord, if that is you, bid me to come to you. And so he tells Peter to come. And so Peter steps out onto the water and he is walking on water. Peter literally walks on water until his attention gets drawn off by the winds, off by the waves, off on the thing. I guess in essence for him and for us today, it was, I'm walking on water. I am out walking on this water. And when he begins to focus on what he's doing and not focus on God, then he begins to sink. And how, like so many of us today, we get our minds focused on something else. We get distracted. Our attention gets drawn away. And so we have to make sure that we are staying focused. When we stay focused, we can accomplish more. Another person that we want to look at is Esther. And we know Esther was a young girl who is fortunate enough to catch the attention of the king. And she becomes the next queen. She takes the place of former Queen Vashti because of finding favor with the king. But she does something phenomenal. She dares to go before the king, even in the face of losing her life. And she begs for the lives of her people. How was she able to do this? She was able to do this because she was focused. And one of the ways that she gets to remain focused is that she gets her people and herself, she goes into prayer. She doesn't just barge up into the king's room, which was a death sentence in and of itself, because the king had to send for you. You couldn't invite yourself to go see the king. The king had to send for you. So her and her people go into prayer before she goes before the king. So in essence, she had to stay focused on what she needed to do. She had to stay focused on what was most important. She had to seek God. She had to get on her face and seek him before she goes into the presence of the king to beg for the lives of her people. Another incident of being focused, well, this was going to be an instance of not being focused. When we look at King Saul, God chose Saul as the first king of Israel. And he has a wonderful beginning. He starts out prophesying. He starts out doing all of these things. And yet he has a fatal flaw. He takes his eyes off of God. He loses his focus. And he becomes focused on being a king. He becomes focused on keeping up with his neighboring nations. He becomes focused on everything except being a king called by God. And because of this, the kingdom is taken from him. And we know what happens next. David takes his place. So it is imperative that we are focused, that we're focused on God, that we're focused on what he tells us to do. More instances of being focused are when we look at the 3 Hebrew boys. We know they were facing the fiery furnace. And it could have been so easy for them to cry, to fall out, to say, hey, I changed my mind. I will bow down. I will bow down. I will do what you tell us to do. But instead of doing that, they're so focused on their God and doing what is right that they are willing to go to their deaths. They're willing to be burned alive because they are focused on God. They're focused on their faith. They're focused on being faithful to him. And because of their focus, because of their faith, they are put into the fiery furnace. And we know they come out triumphant, that Jesus gets into the fire with them. And because of that, they're saved. Even though the men that threw them into the fiery furnace are burned alive, they come out. Baby, stay focused. When we look at Daniel, he was also focused. He was willing to risk his life because of his dedication to God, because he bowed down and prayed 3 times a day. He was focused on serving God. And because of his focus, he also was able to survive a life-threatening situation. We know he was placed in the lion's den, and they assumed that the lions were going to consume him. They were going to eat him up. But God came in and he shut the mouths of the lion. And so Daniel was not eaten alive. And instead, the men that plotted against him and did all these things, they were the ones who were thrown into the lion's den, them and their families, and they were devoured by it. They were the ones that were devoured alive, and not Daniel. Because of his faith, because of his focus, he was saved. When we look at Abraham, he was focused. And what I love about Abraham, I can talk about this one because, you know, he didn't have a son for years, and he prayed, and God gave him a son. We're not told exactly if Abraham was the one asking God for the son. I'm saying he was, and he did, because there's not a doubt in my mind he had to have been asking for a son. Sons and children were important in this time. And so when he receives his son, when he receives Isaac, you know, he is a blessing. But then God asks him to do something that would be hard for any parent. He tells him, take your son, your only son, and offer him as a burnt sacrifice to me. And Abraham, I'm sure this had to be trying. I mean, I can't even, in all honesty, I couldn't imagine. I could not imagine this. But Abraham does not waver. Abraham does not waver at what God tells him. He trusts his God. He trusts our God without doubting, and he's willing to offer up his son because he says within himself, if God can give me this son, he can raise him back up again alive. And so he's taking Isaac up the mountain. And I love this because as he's going up the mountain, he's focused on what God tells him to do. He's focused on being faithful. He's focused on doing what he's supposed to do. And guess what? While he's focused on going up the mountain, God has the ram climbing up the other side. God has prepared a ram for him in the bush. It is just a test of his faith. And because of his focus, he is blessed. And Isaac is saved alive. And we know how the rest of the story goes. But we have to stay focused on God. We have to keep our eyes on him and not on our circumstances, not on what else is going on. When we keep our eyes on God, we are able to withstand the wiles of God. Also tells us to tear down any imagination that exalts itself against him. So we have to keep our minds focused. We have to stop worrying about what else is going on and focus on what God has told us to do. And we have to be faithful to him. So today, I just wanted to talk to you guys about being focused, staying focused, stay focused on God.